So I wanted to redo the review that I kind of made about the Lenovo Explorer and just the Windows Mixed Reality headsets in general, because when I first made it I was kind of nervous about talking in the game. If you're watching this, you're probably in the same boat that I was. I couldn't decide between the Oculus or the Vive. It was just so many options. And then these Windows Mixed Reality headsets came in, and that just threw another bunch into the list of the options. After a lot of thought and weighing out the benefits of the different headsets, I decided on the Oculus. I was going to get the Oculus. I was probably about a week away from getting it, and then the Lenovo Explorer went and dropped their price to $200 US or $250 in Canada. And at that moment, I just went straight ahead and bought it. And to be honest, I'm actually really happy I did. The Windows Mixed Reality headsets, they have some drawbacks compared to the Oculus or the Vive. The biggest one being the tracking. Now, the tracking in the Windows Mixed Reality headset is actually really solid, especially when it's right in front of you. It can pick you up in this FOV, and it's actually, the tracking FOV is wider than what you see, because the FOV of what I see is about, say, there. But the actual tracking, where this has like good tracking, is out here. So you never actually notice in your own personal vision when you go out of tracking. It's namely other people who notice. And there's been some confusion. People think that, oh, it only sees in front of you, so you can't reach behind you. But these controllers are quite clever. They have gyroscopes and accelerometers, so they can track everywhere. It's not as accurate as when it's in front of you, but it works pretty well. And with the inside-out tracking, you can go right down, look down, and you don't have to worry about losing tracking, as long as the headset can have points of reference, and if it can see your arms. You have a really good solid room scale tracking. With the Oculus, you can have decent tracking with 2 sensors, but for a good room scale, it's recommended to have a 3rd sensor. And even with that setup, if something gets in the way of those sensors, you can lose tracking when you, say, bend down or look behind something. With this, it's a solid option that is simpler in some sense, but it works really well in a lot of others. As far as the screen quality, these headsets, the Windows Mixed Reality, except for the Samsung Odyssey, they use LCD screen panels. So when it comes to the colors, they're not as vibrant, or they don't have as good of contrast as the OLED panels of the other ones. But the subpixel arrangement is RGB. It goes one after the other. So this fills up a lot more space when it comes to the pixels. It's a bit of a misconception that the LCD panels are just bad in every way. But when it comes to screen clarity, they're better than the Vive Pro or the Samsung Odyssey. But those ones still give better immersion. The colors of the OLED just make everything pop out to you. So even though it has a slight bit lower resolution, those ones typically look better. We don't usually talk about the pixels per inch. We usually talk about pixels per degree, because that's what translates based on what your FOV is, the optics, the lenses, and everything. But to kind of just give some sort of point of reference about the screens, I'm just going to mention the pixels per inch on the different headsets. Now the Oculus and the Vive both use very similar screen displays, and the pixels per inch on that, they're close to 450 pixels per inch within one row. Now with the Samsung Odyssey and the Vive Pro, it's a little bit over 600. With the LCD cheaper Windows Mixed Reality headsets, it's over 700. So you're giving up the vibrant colors for more screen clarity. Text is a lot easier to read in this. I feel completely comfortable in this sitting down with the virtual desktop and just working on the computer. I can read everything, it looks great. With the Samsung Odyssey and Vive Pro, I've heard that that's also pretty good as well. They're really good in that sense. But the subpixel arrangement on those, they have more blacks in between the pixels. So even though the number of pixels in those displays are higher than these ones, they actually have a slightly worse screen door effect, and the pixels per inch is lower because it's spaced out more. So that's just something to keep in mind. So if you are buying the Windows Mixed Reality headsets and going with a little bit cheaper route with the Lenovo Explorer, HP, Dell, any of those ones, it's not a bad experience. It's still great. I feel fully immersed. The main issue when I notice the colors is in rooms or places that are a bit dark. The Great Pug is actually a really big example of where I saw this. Back with my old Oculus DK2, the colors were really vibrant. But then when it came to this, even though everything was so clear, it's just everything felt a little bit washed out, almost like a gray haze across everything. So in those places, it's quite noticeable. But in a normal, bright environment, you don't really notice it. These are just so immersive. I wouldn't call this a upgrade from the Vive or the Oculus, because those have points that make them just really good. The tracking is perfect on them. With the Oculus, you have the capacitive touch sensors. So instead of just having a trackpad here that you move your thumb around to do different gestures, you actually do the gestures with your hands, and it shows them in game. So things like that bring up the immersion as well. Something else to bring out is the lens quality on these. The sweet spot is actually quite small. Like, let me see. It's about there, I'm gonna say. Which, when you're looking straight ahead, is fine. You don't notice it. Or at least I don't notice it. If you're looking around with your eyes, you can see it starts to get blurry around the edges. Again, it's not terrible, but it varies by person how much it affects you. And for the FOV, when a lot of them come stock, it's either comparable or slightly less than the Oculus. The Oculus says that its FOV is 110 degrees, but with testing, a lot of people say it's actually closer to about 95. The reason that I think, at least, that they rate it at 110 is because the screen on the Oculus, it shows the image to you in a square sort of shape, and going from corner to corner, it is 110 degrees. The Vive and the Samsung Odyssey are rated at 110 degrees. The Lenovo Explorer is rated at 110 degrees. But when I put it on, it was not 110 degrees. I've tried the Acer, I've tried the HP, and they were not 110 degrees for the field of view. A lot of this was the way that the headset sat on your head, the face padding, stuff like that. These headsets, the ones like the Lenovo Explorer and the Acer, they have these foam pieces that kind of go towards your nose, and when those press on it, it kind of pushes the screen a little bit away from your face. And I noticed this quite a bit. It really shrunk down the FOV so it was closer to 90, 95. So when it comes stock, it's not 110 degrees like it's rated at. But I went and I got a VR cover face pad. Those are a replacement one that sits a little bit thinner and it cuts out the nose area. And when I put that on, it brought the screen closer to my face, and now it does feel like 110 degrees. It's a lot wider FOV and it's so much more immersive. Some people were worried that when you cut out the nose piece, you'll get light bleed. But because the screen sits closer to my face, I don't actually notice any light bleed. It's very similar to how I assumed the Oculus would be. With the Oculus, it doesn't have the nose piece either, but it's still fully immersive. So if you're contemplating getting one of these headsets, I highly recommend getting a VR face cover. Overall, I've got to say that I just love this headset. Especially for the price. I mean, 250 Canadian or $200 US, because it was on sale when I bought it. It's just a steal for these things. And if you can get one for a good deal, I highly recommend it. Also, if your computer isn't super powerful, the Windows Mixed Reality headsets are able to run at lower spec than something like the Vive or the Oculus. With those ones, it recommends at least a GTX 1060. But these can actually run on Intel chipsets. If it's newer than a 600 series Intel chipset, they can run on it. So that opens up a whole market for people who want to get into VR. So yeah, I just wanted to kind of display the tracking of these things. I mean, it's a big issue. A lot of people think that these have really bad tracking, but it's really good. I mean, but I can go everywhere. It keeps tracking that. I don't even have to look at it. Yeah, it works pretty good here. But you're probably wondering, okay, what if it doesn't see the hands? Well, I can put my hands down here, and after a couple seconds, what the mixed reality software does is it locks the hands in place. They don't want them flying all over the place. So when it does this, it's just locked. I can move my hands. I'm moving them above my head right now, but it just tracks rotation. And one issue when they're locked like this is if you turn around, by actually turning around, they're still locked in the same space. And that can kind of lead to a few glitches. Say I have my hands, let's put them back here. I'm going to move around, and they're stuck because they don't know where they're supposed to be. So with things like that, you kind of just develop habits of keeping the controllers in your FOV every once in a while. But overall, it works great. I love it. It's a really good setup. I highly recommend these headsets if you're looking for a cheaper alternative to get into VR or something like VR chat.